The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty parking lot of the Broken Spoke Saloon, a modest establishment that had stood the test of time in the sprawling heat of Austin. The sign above the entrance had faded over the decades, peeling under the relentless assault of UV rays and thunderstorms, but the reputation of the place remained as strong as ever among locals who appreciated authentic country music. Inside, the air conditioner hummed a constant battle against the heat, providing just enough relief for the patrons who gathered there every Thursday night to shuffle their boots across the worn wooden floor. It was the kind of place where the beer was always cold, the neon lights buzzed with a comforting electric hum, and the ghosts of legends seemed to sit on the bar stools next to you. George Strait knew this place well. He knew the smell of the sawdust, the specific creak of the stage, and the way the light hit the dust motes dancing in the afternoon haze. But today, George was not at the Broken Spoke. He was miles away, trapped in a reality that felt as foreign to him as the surface of the moon. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing the 41st floor of the Skyline Tower in downtown Austin. The contrast was physically jarring. Instead of the warm, dark wood and welcoming shadows of a honky-tonk, George stepped into a world of aggressive brightness. The offices of Vortex Media were a cathedral of glass and brushed steel. Everything was white or transparent. The walls were glass. The tables were glass. Even the chairs looked like sculptures made of wire and mesh that would leave a pattern on a man's back if he sat in them too long. George Strait adjusted his hat, pulling the brim down slightly, as if to shield his eyes from the glare of the monitor screens that lined every wall. He felt the weight of his 71 years in his knees as he walked across the polished concrete floor, his boots making a heavy, distinct clack that echoed in the sterile silence. He was the king of country, a man who had sold out stadiums from Cheyenne to Houston, a man whose voice had been the soundtrack to millions of lives. But here in this hive of digital marketing, he felt small. He felt like an artifact on display. A young woman at the front desk barely looked up from her tablet as he approached. She wore headphones and was typing furiously. When she finally noticed the shadow of the cowboy hat falling across her desk, she blinked twice, not recognizing the face that had graced 60 #1 hits. She simply pointed toward a large conference room at the end of the hall where a group of people were already gathering. George nodded politely, tipping his hat to her silence, and made his way toward the glass box that awaited him. Inside the conference room, the air was frigid. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by young executives who looked like they had just graduated from college. They wore T-shirts under expensive blazers and sneakers that cost more than George's first horse. At the head of the table stood Tyler. Tyler was the boy wonder of the Austin marketing scene, a 26-year-old prodigy who spoke in a language of acronyms and buzzwords that made George's head spin. Tyler had a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a handshake that felt like gripping a dead fish. He was currently tasked with the strategy for the relaunch of George's brand, a concept that George found inherently ridiculous. He didn't have a brand. He had a guitar and a life. George took the seat offered to him. It was an ergonomic nightmare designed for posture rather than comfort. He sat stiffly, placing his resistal hat on the empty chair beside him. He smoothed the front of his starch-pressed shirt and folded his hands on the glass table. His knuckles were thick and weathered, the hands of a man who roped steers and fixed fences, not just a man who strummed chords. He looked around the room. The young executives were staring at him. They weren't looking at him with the reverence of fans, but with the calculating gaze of butchers sizing up a steer. They were looking for the cuts of meat that would sell. They were looking for the angle. Tyler clapped his hands together, breaking the silence. He paced the room with the energy of a man who had consumed too much espresso. He tapped a screen on the wall, and a presentation flared to life. Charts and graphs appeared, showing lines going up and down, showing demographics and engagement rates. George watched the colors dance, but his mind was drifting. He was thinking about the ranch. He was thinking about the fence line in the north pasture that needed mending. He was thinking about Norma. She had stayed home today, tending to the garden. He wished he was there with her, watching the tomatoes turn red in the sun, instead of listening to Tyler talk about capturing the Gen Z demographic. Tyler stopped pacing and leaned over the table, his eyes locking onto George. He lowered his voice, trying to sound conspiratorial and grave. George, listen to me, Tyler said, dropping the formalities. We have been analyzing the data. The traditional cowboy image is great. It is classic. But the data shows that people today crave vulnerability. They do not want the stoic hero anymore. They want the broken man. They want to see the cracks in the armor. We need to humanize you, George. We need to show them that the king bleeds just like everyone else. George shifted in his chair. He felt a flash of irritation. He had spent his entire career keeping his private life private. He sang about heartbreak, sure, but he sang about it with dignity. He didn't air his dirty laundry. He didn't weep for cameras. That wasn't the cowboy way. It wasn't the straight way. I appreciate the work you folks are doing. George said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the glass table. But I am a singer. I sing songs. If people like them, they buy them. If they don't, they don't. I am not interested in manufacturing drama. Tyler smiled a condescending little smirk that made George's right hand twitch. We are not manufacturing it, George, Tyler said smoothly. We are excavating it. We have been scouring the internet, deep diving into forums and archives that haven't been touched in 40 years. We have a team of digital archaeologists, essentially. And George, you are not going to believe what we found. It is gold. Absolute viral gold. This is the thing that is going to make the pre-sale of the new box set explode. George frowned. He didn't like the sound of that. He didn't like the idea of strangers digging through his past, turning over rocks he had left undisturbed for decades. What are you talking about, son? George asked, his eyes narrowing. Tyler pulled a smartphone from his pocket. He connected it to the room's expensive surround sound system with a thin white cable. He looked around the room at his team, nodding as if to say, "Watch this." Then he looked back at George. We found a file, Tyler said. It was on a server from a defunct recording studio in San Marcos, a place that went belly up in the mid-80s. It seems they recorded all their incoming calls, and they kept the tapes. This file was uploaded by a former employee just for kicks on a Gearhead forum. Nobody noticed it, until our algorithm flagged it this morning. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. George felt a cold knot form in his stomach. San Marcos. He had recorded some demos there a lifetime ago, back when he was nobody, back when he was just a kid with a guitar and a dream, and a wife who believed in him more than he believed in himself. Tyler pressed play. The sound that filled the room was not music. It was the static hiss of an old magnetic tape. It was a sound from another era, a sound of analog decay. Then came the harsh mechanical clicking of a rotary phone being dialed. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm of the past. Then a ringing tone. Once, twice. Finally a click as the line was picked up. "Yeah, City Sound Studio," a man's voice barked. It was rough, impatient, the voice of a man who smoked too many cigarettes and owed too much money. There was a pause on the tape, a hesitation, and then a voice spoke that made George Strait's heart stop beating in his chest. "Hello," came the voice. It was soft, trembling slightly, but possessed of a steel core that George knew better than his own name. "Is this Mr. Henderson?" It was Norma. But it wasn't the Norma of today. It wasn't the grandmother who baked cookies and laughed at his bad jokes. It was Norma from 1981. She sounded so young, so incredibly young. George felt the blood drain from his face. He gripped the edge of the glass table so hard his fingertips turned white. The young executives were watching him eagerly, checking their tablets, monitoring his reaction as if he were a lab rat. But George didn't see them anymore. He was transported back 40 years. "Yeah, this is Henderson," the man on the tape said. "Who is this?" "My name is Norma," the voice on the tape said. "Norma Straight. I am calling about my husband George. He was in there last week. He recorded a demo, Unwound." George closed his eyes. Unwound. His first hit. The song that started it all. He remembered recording it. He remembered the thrill of hearing it back. But he also remembered the worry, the crushing weight of poverty. They had no money back then. He was working cattle during the day and playing honky-tonks at night for beer money. "Yeah, I remember him," the man Henderson said. Good voice. "But like I told him, lady studio time ain't free. He owes me $500 for the session and the tape. If I don't get it by Friday, I'm erasing the master. I got paying customers waiting." George's breath hitched. He had never known this. He had thought the studio gave him the time on credit because they liked his sound. He had thought he paid them back months later after the record deal came through. He never knew there was a deadline. He never knew the master tape was held hostage. "Please, Mr. Henderson," Norma's voice pleaded. The desperation in her tone cut through George like a serrated knife. "You cannot erase it. That song is his chance. He has a gift, sir. A real gift. If he loses this tape, he is going to give up. He told me last night. He said if this doesn't work, he is going to sell his guitar and go work the oil fields full-time. You cannot let him do that." George felt a tear, hot and heavy, roll down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He was paralyzed. He remembered that conversation. He remembered telling her he was quitting. He was ready to give up on the music. He felt like a failure. He didn't know she was fighting for him in the shadows. "I don't run a charity," Mrs. Straight Henderson grunted. $500, Friday. Or the tape gets taped over with a car dealership jingle. "Wait," Norma said quickly. I have something. I don't have the cash. We are barely making rent. But I have a ring. It was my grandmother's. It is gold with a real diamond. It is the only thing of value I own. It is worth more than 500. Much more." Tyler, the marketing boy, paused the tape for a second. "Look at this emotion," he whispered to his team. "This is the hook. The sacrificial wife. It is pure melodrama." George didn't hear him. His mind was screaming. The ring, Norma's grandmother's ring. She had told him she lost it. She told him it fell down the drain in the kitchen sink. He remembered how she cried about losing it. He remembered holding her, telling her it was just a thing, that it didn't matter. He had comforted her over a lie she told to save his dream. Tyler pressed play again. "Bring it in," Henderson said, his voice softening with greed. "If it is real, I will give you the tape, but don't tell your husband. I don't want some angry cowboy coming down here accusing me of swindling his wife." "He won't know," Norma promised. Her voice broke on the tape, a sound of pure heartbreak and resolve. "He will never know. I will tell him I paid you with money I saved from groceries. He is a proud man, Mr. Henderson. If he knew I sold my family's legacy to pay for his singing, he would never forgive himself. He would refuse to sing another note. Please just take the ring and give him his chance." The tape ended with the click of the receiver. The silence in the conference room was absolute, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a tomb. George Strait sat there, the king of country, the icon, the legend, and he felt like he was crumbling into dust. The image of Norma, young and pregnant, driving her beat-up car to a seedy studio in San Marcos to hand over her only heirloom to a shark, just so George could have a shot at being a star. It was too much. The weight of that secret kept for 40 years crushed him. All the applause he had ever heard, all the awards on his mantle, they didn't belong to him. They belonged to the woman who sold her history to buy his future. He lowered his head into his hands. His shoulders began to shake. A sound escaped him, a guttural sob that he couldn't hold back. It was a sound of gratitude and shame and overwhelming love. The man who never broke the cowboy, who always kept his chin up, was weeping in front of a room full of strangers. Tyler watched him with a look of triumph. He tapped his tablet furiously. "This is it," he whispered to his assistant. "Look at him. If we get this on video, if we release the audio with a reaction shot, we are talking millions of views. Millions. This is the vulnerability campaign. It writes itself." Tyler didn't understand. He saw tears and he saw dollars. He didn't see the soul of a man being ripped open. He didn't see that he was trespassing on holy ground. He cleared his throat. George Tyler said, his voice devoid of any real sympathy. That is powerful stuff. We can package this. We can put a sad piano track under it, maybe some black and white photos of you and Norma from the 80s. We drop it on TikTok tonight. The headline will be, 'The Secret Sacrifice.' People will eat it up. It is the perfect narrative for the album." George didn't answer immediately. He was struggling to breathe. He was struggling to reconcile the past with the present. The sheer audacity of this boy wanting to turn Norma's pain into a hashtag was slowly penetrating the fog of his grief. The sadness was beginning to curdle. It was beginning to heat up. Deep inside the chest of the old cowboy, a spark was igniting. It was the spark of anger. Not the explosive anger of a young man, but the cold, hard fury of a patriarch who sees wolves circling his family. George took a deep breath, inhaling the recycled air of the office. He wiped his face with his hand, feeling the rough calluses against his wet skin. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but the sadness was gone from them. In its place was something else, something dangerous. He looked at the smartphone on the table, the device that held the voice of his wife hostage. Then he looked at Tyler. "You think this is content?" George whispered. Tyler blinked, confused by the shift in tone. "Well, yes. It is storytelling, George. It is authentic." George stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh screech that made everyone in the room flinch. He towered over the table. He wasn't just an old singer anymore. He was a rancher. He was a man who dealt with 1,000-pound animals and unpredictable weather. He possessed a physical presence that the glass room couldn't contain. He reached out his hand, not shaking, not trembling anymore, and grabbed the white cable connecting the phone to the speakers. With a sharp, violent jerk, he ripped it out. The speakers popped with a loud crack. Tyler jumped back. "George, wait. That is the only copy we have right now. We haven't backed it up to the cloud yet." George held the cable in his hand, staring at the connector, as if it were a snake. "You heard a woman selling her soul for her husband." George said, his voice rising, filling the room, echoing off the glass walls. "You heard a woman giving up the only thing her mother left her, so I could buy guitar strings and gasoline. You heard the most private, the most sacred moment of my life. And you want to put a piano track under it?" He began to walk around the table towards Tyler. His boots hit the floor with a rhythmic, menacing cadence. Clack, clack, clack. The young executives scrambled to move their chairs out of his way, pressing themselves against the glass walls, their eyes wide with fear. They had expected a docile old celebrity. They had gotten a Texas thunderstorm. Tyler backed up until he hit the whiteboard. He held his hands up, palms out. "Mr. Straight, please, you have to understand the market. This is what people want. They want to feel connected to you." "Connected?" George spat the word out like it was poison. "You think listening to my wife beg a loan shark makes people connected to me? That isn't connection, son. That is voyeurism. That is theft. You are stealing her dignity to sell my records, and I won't have it." George stopped inches from Tyler. He loomed over the young man. The smell of old leather and sagebrush seemed to radiate from him, overpowering the sterile scent of the office. George reached out and plucked the smartphone from Tyler's trembling hand. He looked at the screen. The audio file was still open. The waveform of Norma's voice sat there, a jagged line of blue pixels. "You have no idea what that ring meant to her," George said softly, his voice deadly quiet. "She cried for weeks. She told me she was clumsy. She told me she was irresponsible. She took the blame. She carried that guilt, so I wouldn't have to carry the burden of the debt. That is love, boy. That is real love, not likes, not shares love. And you are going to delete it, right now." "But," Tyler stammered, "the campaign, the contract." George's eyes narrowed into slits. "Forget the contract. Forget the campaign. If you don't delete that file and every backup you think you have, I will make it my life's mission to ensure that Vortex Media never gets another client in the music industry. I know people, son. I know the people who built this town before you and your glass towers showed up. I will burn this agency to the ground with one phone call. Do you understand me?" Tyler swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked at the phone in George's hand, then at the furious face of the legend. He realized with a jolt of terror that this wasn't a negotiation. This was an ultimatum from a man who had nothing left to prove and everything to protect. I understand," Tyler whispered. George held out the phone. "Delete it, while I watch." Tyler took the phone with shaking fingers. He tapped the screen. He selected the file. He pressed the trash icon. A prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this file?" Tyler looked at George one last time, hoping for a reprieve. George simply stared at him, his face carved from granite. Tyler pressed yes. The file vanished. The waveform disappeared. George let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But it wasn't over. He looked around the room at the other executives. "If I see this on the internet," George said, addressing the room, "if I see one transcript, one clip, one mention of my wife's ring, I will come back. And I won't be alone." He turned and walked back to his chair. He picked up his resistal hat. He ran his thumb along the brim, dusting off an invisible speck of dirt. He placed it on his head, adjusting it until it sat perfectly just above his eyes. He looked like the king again, but he was changed. He carried a new weight, a new knowledge. He walked to the door. He didn't say goodbye, he didn't shake hands. He pushed the glass door open and walked out into the hallway, leaving the stunned silence of the marketing team behind him. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from purgatory back to earth. George leaned against the metal wall, closing his eyes. The anger was fading, now replaced by a profound, aching tenderness. Norma. His Norma. He thought about all the years they had spent together. 50 years of marriage. He thought he knew everything about her. He thought there were no secrets between them. But she had kept this one. She had kept the biggest one of all. She had protected him from the truth of their poverty, so that the poverty wouldn't kill his spirit. She had bet everything on him. She had bet her heritage, her history, her security. She had bet it all on the sound of his voice. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. George walked out into the heat of the Texas afternoon. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air was thick and humid. It felt real. It felt like home. He walked to his truck, a black Chevy Silverado dually, that took up 2 parking spaces. He climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was hot against his back. He didn't start the engine immediately. He sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the bustling city. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. It was an older model, not the sleek glass slab Tyler had used. He opened his photos. He scrolled past pictures of horses, pictures of grandkids until he found it. A picture of Norma taken just last week. She was standing on the porch of the ranch, laughing at something, holding a glass of iced tea. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the map of their life together. But her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at a pawn shop owner or a studio shark and made a deal with the devil to save an angel. George looked at the photo. His vision blurred again. "I didn't know, honey," he whispered to the screen, his voice breaking in the quiet cab of the truck. "I swear I didn't know." He touched the screen gently with his thumb, tracing the line of her smile. "You never told me. You let me believe I did it on my own. You let me be the big man." He took a deep, ragged breath. "I'm coming home, Norma, and I'm going to buy you a ring. I don't care if I have to buy every diamond in Texas. I'm going to replace it." He keyed the ignition. The engine roared to life, a powerful rumble that shook the frame of the truck. It was a sound of power, of capability. But for the first time, George realized that the fuel for that engine, the fuel for his entire life, wasn't gas or diesel. It was the love of a woman who had sold her past to give him a future. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glass tower and the algorithm behind. He headed west toward the hill country, toward the ranch, toward the truth. The drive west on Highway 290 was usually a decompression chamber for George Strait. It was the stretch of asphalt where the frenetic energy of Austin slowly bled out into the limestone hills and twisted mesquite trees of the Texas hill country. Normally, by the time he passed the city limits of Dripping Springs, the knot in his shoulders would loosen, and the ringing in his ears from amplifiers or boardroom chatter would fade into the steady hum of the tires against the road. But tonight the highway offered no peace. The cab of the Silverado felt less like a sanctuary and more like a confession booth. The silence he usually cherished was now filled with the echo of that tape, the static hiss, the rotary dial, the voice of his wife bargaining with a man who held their future in his grease-stained hands. George gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his knuckles white against the black leather. He was driving on autopilot, his body performing the mechanical motions of changing lanes and signaling turns, while his mind was violently cast back to 1981. He looked out the windshield, but he didn't see the modern gas stations or the new housing developments encroaching on the ranch land. He saw the old apartment on the south side. He saw the peeling wallpaper in the kitchen. He saw the way Norma used to stretch a pound of ground beef to last 3 nights, adding oats and onions, until it was more filler than meat. He had thought he was the provider back then. He had walked around with his chest puffed out, proud that he was playing gigs, bringing home a pocketful of crumpled bills and tips from the jar. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. He remembered the day she told him she lost the ring. It was a Tuesday. He remembered because Tuesdays were the days he didn't have to work the cattle pens, and he usually spent the afternoon restringing his guitar. She had come into the bedroom, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She held up her left hand and it was bare. The pale strip of skin where the gold band used to sit looked like a scar. She told him it must have slipped off while she was washing dishes at the diner, where she picked up shifts. She said she checked the trap under the sink. She said she retraced her steps. She sobbed into his shoulder, her body shaking with what he thought was regret over a lost trinket. He had held her. He had stroked her hair. He had told her, "It's okay, baby. It's just metal and stone. We will get another one when I make it big." He felt a wave of nausea wash over him as the truck crested a hill. She hadn't been crying because she lost it. She had been crying because she had just walked out of a pawn shop or a studio back room, having handed over the only piece of generational wealth she possessed. She was crying because she had lied to him, and she had maintained that lie for 4 decades. Every time he bought her jewelry later, the diamond anniversary bands, the pearl necklaces, she would smile and thank him, but she never mentioned the grandmother's ring. She never said, "This is nice, George, but it doesn't replace what I sold for you." She buried it. She buried the memory so deep that he had walked over it every day without knowing. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in bruises of purple and orange. George turned off the main highway onto the smaller county road that led to the ranch. The tires crunched over gravel, kicking up dust that swirled in the red taillights. The fences here were his fences. The cattle grazing in the twilight were his cattle. The land stretched out for miles, a testament to his success. But as he looked at the rolling pastures, he realized that none of this was really his. It was bought with the interest on a loan Norma took out in 1981. This entire empire, the tractors, the barns, the horses, the legacy, it all rested on the empty finger of a 20-year-old girl who believed in him when he was nothing but a cowboy with a guitar case and a dream. He pulled up to the main gate, punching the code into the keypad. The iron gate swung open slowly. He drove up the winding driveway, the headlights sweeping across the front of the main house. It was a beautiful home built from local stone, solid and unpretentious, just like they wanted. The lights were on inside. A warm yellow glow spilled from the kitchen windows. He could see a silhouette moving back and forth. Norma. George parked the truck, but he didn't get out immediately. He turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence of the country night. The crickets were starting their chorus. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that made the hair on George's arms stand up. He looked at his hands. They were old hands now, liver-spotted and scarred. He looked at the wedding band on his own finger. He had never taken it off. Not for tours, not for movies, not for surgeries. It was the symbol of their union. But tonight it felt heavy. It felt like a shackle of guilt. He took a deep breath, composing himself. He couldn't go in there falling apart. Norma was the rock. If the rock saw the mountain crumbling, she would worry. He had to be strong. He had to be George Strait. He opened the door and stepped out, his boots hitting the gravel with a heavy thud. He walked up the stone path to the front porch. The rocking chairs sat empty, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. He opened the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. It was the smell of home. Roast beef, onions, carrots, and the faint sweet scent of vanilla. It was the smell of 50 years of dinners. He walked down the hallway, his spurs jingling softly, a sound that usually announced his arrival with authority, but tonight sounded like a warning bell. He entered the kitchen. Norma was standing by the stove, stirring a large pot. She was wearing a simple floral blouse and jeans, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. She didn't turn around immediately. "You are late," she said, her voice calm and familiar. "The roast is almost done to death. I was about to feed it to the dogs." George didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt like it was full of sawdust. Norma turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had a smile ready, a teasing reprimand on her lips about him losing track of time. But the smile died the instant she saw his face. Norma Strait knew every line, every shadow, every micro-expression on her husband's face. She had watched him face down hecklers, bad reviews, injuries, and grief. but she had never seen him look like this. He looked stripped. He looked like a man who had been caught in a tornado and set down in a foreign land. "George," she said, the towel dropping from her hand to the floor. "What is it? Is it your heart? Is it the kids?" She rushed to him, crossing the kitchen in 3 strides. She reached out and placed her hands on his arms, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for a diagnosis. George shook his head slowly. "No, everyone is fine. The kids are fine." "Then what?" Norma demanded, giving him a little shake. "You look like you have seen a ghost, George. You are pale as a sheet. Did something happen at the meeting? Did they cancel the tour?" George looked down at her. He looked into the eyes that had watched him sleep for half a century. He reached up and took her hands in his. Her hands were smaller than his, softer, but they had their own stories written in the skin. He looked at her left hand. He looked at the ring finger. It was adorned now with a beautiful diamond solitaire he had bought her for their 30th anniversary. It was a rock, a symbol of wealth. But underneath it, he imagined the ghost of the other ring, the grandmother's ring, the one that was sacrificed. "We need to talk, Norma," George said, his voice raspy. Norma pulled back slightly, sensing the gravity in his tone. This wasn't about business. This was about them. She nodded slowly, leading him to the small round table in the breakfast nook. "Sit down, I will get you some water." "No," George said, holding onto her hand, refusing to let her go. "No water. Just sit with me, please." They sat down. The pot on the stove bubbled away forgotten. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked, tick-tock, tick-tock. George took a breath that shuddered in his chest. "I heard something today," he began. "At the agency. Those boys, those marketing boys, they found a tape." Norma frowned, confused. "A tape? A demo?" "George, you have thousands of demos. Why would that upset you?" "Not a song," George said. "A phone call. From 1981. Norma went still. It wasn't a dramatic freeze like in the movies. It was a subtle tension that ran through her body like a current. Her eyes flickered away from his for a fraction of a second, then came back. 1981, she repeated softly. "That was a long time ago, George." They found a recording from City Sound Studio in San Marcos. George continued, his eyes locking onto hers, refusing to let her look away. It was a recording of a woman calling the studio manager, a Mr. Henderson. She was begging him not to erase a master tape. The tape for unwound. Norma's face drained of color. The calm matriarch facade cracked. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She pulled her hand away from his and placed it in her lap, covering it with her other hand, as if trying to hide the evidence. George leaned forward. "She offered him a ring," he whispered. "Her grandmother's ring. She told him it was the only thing of value she owned. She told him her husband couldn't know because he was too proud. She told him that if her husband knew he was singing on borrowed money, he would quit." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Norma looked down at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her finger. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to laugh it off. She knew George. She knew he didn't bluff. George watched her, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was so quiet, he had to lean in to hear it. "It was a beautiful ring," she said softly. "It was rose gold, Victorian. It had a small diamond in the center, but the setting was... it was like a flower. My grandmother gave it to me on her deathbed. She said, 'Norma, this is for when you need a miracle.'" George felt a tear slide down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. "You told me you lost it," he said, his voice cracking. "You told me it went down the drain. I took the P-trap apart, Norma. I spent 3 hours under that sink with a wrench looking for it, and you stood there and watched me." "I had to," Norma said, looking up at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "I had to, George. Look at me. Look at who you were back then. You were 29 years old. You were working yourself to the bone. You were tired. You were discouraged. Every label in Nashville had turned you down. You were talking about selling the guitar and buying a landscaping truck. You were going to give up." "I would have found another way," George insisted, though he knew deep down it was a lie. "No, you wouldn't," Norma said firmly. "You wouldn't have. We were broke, George, not just tight. We were broke. We had notices on the electricity. We had no gas in the car. Henderson wanted $500. We didn't have 500 cents. If I had told you, I needed to sell my heirloom to pay for your hobby you would have refused. Your pride. Your stubborn Texas pride. It would have killed your dream before it even took a breath. So you lied to me, George said, the hurt evident in his voice. You let me believe I made it on my own talent. You did make it on your talent, Norma argued, leaning across the table. The ring didn't sing the song. George, you did. The ring just bought you the 3 minutes of tape you needed to show the world what you could do. It was an investment. And it was the best investment I ever made. George shook his head, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. But the cost, Norma. The cost. You loved that ring. It was your family. It was your connection to your grandmother. And you threw it into a pawn shop deal for a chance. Just a chance. I didn't throw it away, Norma said, her voice trembling. I planted it, like a seed. And look what grew, George. Look at this life. Look at our son. Look at the music. Do you think I care about a piece of gold when I have this? When I have you doing what you were born to do? George stood up, pacing the small kitchen. He felt restless, caged by his own gratitude. It's not about the gold, Norma. It's about the burden. You carried that secret for 40 years. You let me walk around thinking I was the big man, the provider, while you were the one who paid the toll. I feel like a fraud. Norma stood up too. She walked over to him and grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to stop pacing. Stop it, she commanded. Stop it right now, George Strait. You are not a fraud. You are a man who worked for everything he has. I just opened the door. You walked through it. That is what marriage is. It is not about keeping score. It is about doing what needs to be done. I did what needed to be done. But I never replaced it, George said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I bought you diamonds, I bought you cars, but I never gave you back what you lost. You gave me a life, Norma said softly. You gave me a life filled with music. You gave me a home where we don't have to worry about electricity bills. You gave me the world, George. That ring. It served its purpose. It is gone. And I don't regret it. Not for 1 second. George looked at her and he saw the steel in her eyes. The same steel he had heard on the tape. The strength of a woman who would bet everything on love. He realized then that he had never really known how strong she was. He was the cowboy. He was the icon. But she was the pioneer. She was the one who cleared the path. He pulled her into his arms. He hugged her tighter than he had in years. He buried his face in her neck, smelling the vanilla and the soap, and the scent of the woman who had saved him. He wept. He let go of the stoicism, he let go of the king of country persona, and he just cried like a husband who realized he didn't deserve his wife. I love you, he choked out. I love you so much, Norma. I know, she whispered, stroking the back of his head. I know you do. They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, swaying slightly as if to a slow song that only they could hear. The roast beef cooled on the stove. The sun vanished completely, leaving the ranch in darkness. But inside the kitchen, the air was clear. The secret was out. The ghost was gone. Tell me about the ring, he said. Norma blinked. What? Describe it to me, George said. Every detail. The cut of the stone, the pattern on the band, the way the light hit it. I want to know everything. Norma hesitated. George, it's gone. It's been 40 years. Henderson probably melted it down the next day. I don't care about Henderson. George said, I want to know what it looked like, please. Norma sighed, a wistful smile touching her lips. It was delicate. It was rose gold, but old gold, you know. A little copper in it. The band was etched with tiny vines. Ivy, I think. And the diamond. It wasn't perfect. It had a small carbon spot near the bottom. My grandmother called it the beauty mark. It was an old European cut, not shiny like the modern ones. It glowed. It had a soft, warm light. George listened intently, memorizing every word. Rose gold, ivy vines, old European cut, carbon spot. He was building a picture in his mind. He was constructing a blueprint. Do you have a picture of it? He asked. Maybe from when you were a girl? Or from our wedding day? Norma thought for a moment. Maybe she said, in the attic, in the old cedar chest. There is an album from my teenage years. I might be wearing it in one of the photos from my Sweet 16. George nodded. Find it, he said. Tomorrow. We find that picture. Why? Norma asked. George, you can't just go to a jeweler and order a replacement. It wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have the history. I know, George said. I'm not going to a jeweler. He turned and looked out the window into the darkness of the ranch. His mind was racing. He was thinking about San Marcos. He was thinking about the old studio. He knew it was gone, shut down decades ago. But buildings remain, records remain, and people. People leave trails. Henderson, he said the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. He's probably dead, Norma said gently. He was old back then, maybe George said, but he had a son. I remember him. He used to sweep the floors. A kid named Rick. If Henderson kept tapes, maybe he kept other things. Pawn slips, ledgers. Norma looked at him with concern. George, what are you thinking? You are not going to hunt down a ghost. I am not hunting a ghost, George said, turning back to her. I am hunting a ring. But why? Norma asked. Why now? After all this time? Because George said, taking her hand again and kissing the knuckles, because you sold your past to buy my future, and I have spent 40 years enjoying that future while you lived without your past. It is not right. It is not balanced. He looked her in the eye. I'm going to find it, Norma. I don't care where it is. I don't care who has it. I'm going to find your grandmother's ring, and I am going to put it back on your finger where it belongs. Norma looked at him, and she saw the stubbornness, the determination that had made him a star. She knew there was no arguing with him. When George Strait made up his mind, the world just had to get out of the way. Okay, she whispered. Okay, George. George squeezed her hand. Now he said, his voice returning to its normal, gentle rumble. Let's eat that roast before it turns into jerky. They sat down to dinner. They talked about the kids. They talked about the ranch. They talked about the weather. But underneath the mundane conversation, there was a shift in the universe. The balance of power had changed. The secret was out. And the cowboy had a new quest. He wasn't singing for fans anymore. He wasn't singing for money. He was preparing for the most important ride of his life. Later that night, as Norma slept beside him, George lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the darkness. He replayed the description of the ring in his mind. Rose gold, ivy vines, beauty mark. He closed his eyes and prayed. He prayed to the God of lost things. He prayed that somewhere in the vast dusty corners of Texas, that ring was still waiting to come home. Tomorrow he would start. Tomorrow he would go back to where it all began. He would go back to San Marcos. He would turn over every stone. He would find the son of the man who took the ring. He would use every ounce of his fame, every dollar in his bank account, every connection he had. He would not rest, because a king is nothing without his queen, and his queen had been missing her crown for far too long. The morning sun broke over the horizon of the Strait Ranch, painting the sky in streaks of violent violet and burning gold. The roosters had long since finished their crowing, and the cattle were already lowing in the north pasture, waiting for feed. Usually, George Strait would be out there with them, a sack of grain over his shoulder, his boots caked in mud, living the life he loved. But today, the king of country was not a rancher. He was a detective. He sat in his study, a room lined with platinum records and awards that felt increasingly like hollow tin. On the desk in front of him was a notepad, a pot of black coffee, and a telephone. He had been on the line for 3 hours, calling in favors that he had saved up for 40 years. He wasn't calling record executives or radio promoters. He was calling old session players, retired roadies, and the guys who used to fix the amps in the dive bars of San Marcos. He was looking for a ghost named Rick Henderson. The trail was cold. The city sound studio had burned down in an electrical fire in 1996. The elder Henderson had died of a heart attack 2 years later. The building was now a parking lot for a chain grocery store. It seemed as if the physical evidence of George's beginning had been wiped from the face of the earth. But George knew that in Texas, nothing truly disappears. It just moves to a cheaper zip code. Around 10 o'clock, he got a hit. An old bass player named Rusty, who now ran a bait shop near Canyon Lake, remembered Rick. Said he went by Slick back in the day, and that he had moved out to Luling to work on oil rigs before hurting his back. Rusty thought he was running a small engine repair shop off Highway 80. It wasn't a phone number or an address, but it was a direction. And for a man like George Strait, a direction was all he needed. He didn't take the big dually truck this time. He took the old 1985 Chevy Silverado he kept in the back barn, the one he used for hunting. It was beat-up faded blue and smelled of wet dog and tobacco. It was anonymous. He didn't want to roll up to a struggling mechanic's shop in a $100,000 vehicle. He wanted to arrive as a man, not a monument. He threw a cooler of water in the back, checked the oil, and headed out. The drive to Luling was a journey through the backroads of memory. The landscape changed from the rolling limestone hills to the flatter, scrubbier plains of the oil patch. Pump jacks nodded lazily in the fields, like giant metal birds pecking at the earth. The air smelled of sulfur and barbecue smoke. George kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was rehearsing what he would say. How do you ask a man for a piece of your soul back? How do you explain that a piece of jewelry means more than the millions in the bank? He found the shop just past the railroad tracks. It was a corrugated metal shack surrounded by a graveyard of lawnmowers, tractors, and rusted-out cars. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Rick's Fix It. If it's broke, we make it run." George pulled the truck onto the gravel lot, the tires crunching loudly. He killed the engine and sat for a moment adjusting his hat. He wasn't nervous about the confrontation. He was terrified of the answer. If Rick didn't have the ring, if it was truly lost, then he had failed Norma. And failure was not an option. He stepped out into the heat. A dog barked from a chain near the porch, a mangy blue heeler that looked as tired as the tractors. A man emerged from the dark interior of the shop, wiping grease from his hands with a red rag. He was in his 60s, wearing stained coveralls, his face etched with the deep lines of a man who had worked hard and worried harder. He squinted against the sun, looking at the stranger. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice rough like gravel in a mixer. "Are you Rick?" George asked, walking forward slowly, his hands visible and open. "Rick Henderson?" The man stopped wiping his hands. He tensed up. "Who's asking?" "My name is George Strait." The mechanic froze. He squinted harder, tilting his head as if trying to reconcile the face in front of him with the face he had seen on album covers for decades. He looked at the old truck, then back at George. He let out a short, dry laugh. "Bullshit," he said. "George Strait drives a shiny new rig. And he don't come to Luling to get his lawnmower fixed. It's me, Rick," George said, stepping into the shadow of the awning. He took off his sunglasses. The blue eyes were unmistakable. The voice was the same baritone that had drifted out of every radio in Texas since 1981. Rick's jaw dropped slightly. He lowered the rag. "Well, I'll be damned. It is you." "What? What are you doing here, Mr. Strait? I ain't got no autograph book." "I'm not here for autographs," George said. "I'm here about your father and the City Sound Studio." Rick's face darkened. The surprise was replaced by a defensive wall. "My dad's been dead 20 years. The studio's gone. If this is about royalties or master tapes, you're barking up the wrong tree. We lost everything in the fire. I got nothing but debts and bad memories. I'm not here for money," George said quickly, stepping closer. "And I'm not here about the music. I'm here about a ring." "A ring?" Rick repeated, confused. "In 1981, my wife Norma came to see your dad," George explained, his voice steady but intense. "She brought him a gold ring, an heirloom. She gave it to him as collateral to pay for my session, the session for Unwound." Rick scratched his chin, leaving a smear of grease on his grey stubble. 1981. I was just a kid sweeping floors back then. I remember your session, though. Dad said you had the sound, but he said that about everyone who paid cash. She didn't pay cash," George said. "She paid with the ring. She never got it back. I'm trying to find out what happened to it." Rick sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Mr. Strait, look around. Does it look like I'm sitting on a pile of gold?" Dad was a pack rat, sure, but he was also a gambler. If he took a ring, he probably pawned it at the track the next week, or it burned in the fire. The insurance company didn't pay out a dime because they said the wiring was faulty. I ended up with nothing but boxes of charred paperwork and junk. "Boxes?" George latched onto the word. "You have boxes?" Rick shrugged. "Yeah, in the back shed. Just junk. Old invoices, cancelled checks, broken microphones. I've been meaning to burn them for years, just never got around to it. Hard to let go of the past even when it wasn't a good one." "Can I look?" George asked. Rick looked at him like he was crazy. "You want to dig through 20-year-old trash? In this heat?" "I have to," George said. "Please, it means everything to my wife." Rick studied George's face. He saw the desperation there, the raw humanity that didn't fit the superstar image. He saw a husband trying to fix a mistake. Rick softened. He tossed the grease rag onto a barrel. "All right," he grunted. "Suit yourself, but watch out for brown recluses. That shed hasn't been opened since the Bush administration." They walked around the back of the shop to a small wooden shed that looked ready to collapse. Rick wrestled with a rusted padlock, cursing under his breath, until it finally snapped open. He kicked the door wide. The smell of mildew, rotting paper, and old dust billowed out. Inside it was crammed floor to ceiling with cardboard boxes, plastic bins, and piles of electronic debris. George didn't hesitate. He stepped into the gloom. "Where are the financial records?" he asked. "From the early 80s. Rick pointed to a stack of water-damaged banker's boxes in the corner, probably bottom of that stack. Dad kept everything by year, or at least he tried to. George began to dig. He moved heavy boxes of cables aside. He ignored the spiders scurrying into the shadows. He lifted the lids of boxes filled with reel-to-reel tapes that had melted together in the heat. He found invoices for bands that never made it, dreams that died in a garage. He felt a profound sadness for all the music that was silenced in this room, but he pushed it aside. He was hunting for one specific transaction. After an hour, his shirt was soaked through with sweat. His hands were covered in black dust. Rick stood by the door watching him, smoking a cigarette. "You really love her, don't you?" Rick asked quietly. "To be digging in this filth." "She sold it so I could sing," George said without looking up. "She saved me, Rick. I never knew." Rick nodded slowly. "My dad. He wasn't a bad man," he said reflectively. "But he was hard. He liked leverage. He used to keep a safety box. Things people left behind. Watches, guitars, rings. He called it his retirement fund." George froze. He looked up slowly. "Where is the safety box, Rick?" Rick flicked his cigarette butt into the weeds. He walked over to a metal tool chest in the corner of the shed. It was covered in a tarp. He pulled the tarp off, revealing a heavy steel cabinet with multiple drawers. When the fire happened, Rick said, "I grabbed this. It was the only thing I could carry out before the roof came down. I thought maybe there was cash in it. There wasn't. Just collateral." George stood up, his knees cracking. He walked over to the cabinet. Rick opened the top drawer. It screeched in protest. Inside, nestled in little compartments lined with felt, were the remnants of desperate bargains. A silver pocket watch, a pearl necklace with a broken clasp, a set of gold teeth, and there in the back corner a small velvet pouch. Rick reached in and picked up the pouch. He weighed it in his hand. "I never sold this stuff," he said. "Felt like bad mojo, profiting off other people's bad luck. Dad didn't care, but I did." He handed the pouch to George. George's hands trembled. He took the velvet bag. The fabric was old and stiff. He loosened the drawstring. He tipped it over into his palm. A ring tumbled out. It was rose gold. The metal was dull from age, but beneath the grime, it had a warm, coppery glow. The band was etched with delicate ivy vines worn smooth by time. In the center sat an old European cut diamond, not flashy or blinding, but glowing with a deep inner fire. And there, near the bottom prong, was the carbon spot, the beauty mark. George stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the object in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. It carried the weight of Norma's grandmother. It carried the weight of 1981. It carried the weight of the lie that had protected him. "Is that it?" Rick asked softly. George couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears welling in his eyes and cutting tracks through the dust on his face. He rubbed his thumb over the stone. It was real. It was here. Against all odds, against fire and time and death, it had waited for him. "Take it," Rick said. George looked at Rick. "I want to pay you. I want to give you whatever you want. Name a price. A new shop. A house. Anything." Rick shook his head. "No, that ain't mine to sell. And it wasn't my dad's to keep. He should have given it back when you made your first million. It belongs to your wife. You take it back to her. That's payment enough. Maybe it clears some of the bad karma off my family name." George reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded check he had prepared just in case. He didn't look at the amount, but he knew it was enough to change Rick's life. He placed it on the workbench. "I'm not paying for the ring," George said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm paying for the storage. And for the honesty, don't tear it up, Rick. Fix this place up, or get out of here and go fishing. Just take it. Rick looked at the check, then at George. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of the chin. Thank you, Mr. Straight. George gripped Rick's hand. The grease and the dust didn't matter. It was a handshake between men who understood the value of things that couldn't be bought. Thank you, Rick. You have no idea what you just did. George walked out of the shed, clutching the ring in his fist like a lifeline. He got into the old truck and started the engine. As he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. Rick was standing in the doorway of the shed, watching him go. George didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need music. The engine hummed a song of redemption all the way back to the hill country. The drive back felt different. The landscape looked brighter. The burden that had been crushing his chest since the meeting at Vortex Media was lifting. He stopped at a gas station, not for gas, but to go into the restroom and wash the grime off his face and hands. He used a paper towel to carefully polish the ring, spitting on it and rubbing it until the rose gold gleamed and the diamond sparked. He placed it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. He arrived at the ranch just as the sun was setting. The sky was a deep velvet blue now, the first stars appearing. The lights of the house were welcoming. He parked the truck and walked to the front door. He didn't go inside immediately. He walked around the side of the house to the garden. Norma was there. She was watering her roses, the hose hissing softly in the quiet evening. She loved this time of day. It was her sanctuary. She didn't hear him approach across the grass. Norma, George said softly. She turned. She saw him standing there, still dusty from the trip, his shirt stained with sweat, but his eyes shining with a light she hadn't seen since they were kids. She dropped the hose. The water gurgled into the grass. "George?" she asked. "Where have you been? You've been gone all day." George walked up to her. He took her wet hands in his. He didn't care about the mud or the water. He looked at her face, the face that had aged with him, the face that he loved more than breath itself. "I went to find something," he said. "Something that was lost." Norma looked at him, confused. Then she saw his hand move to his pocket. She stopped breathing. Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered. "George, no. It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," George said. "Not for us." He pulled the ring out. In the twilight, the diamond caught the light from the porch lamp and flashed a brilliant spark. The rose gold seemed to glow with its own warmth. Norma gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She stared at the ring as if it were a hallucination. She reached out with a trembling finger and touched it. "My grandmother's," she choked out. "How? George, how?" "It was waiting," George said, his voice breaking. "It was waiting in a box in Luling. It never left Texas, Norma. It was just waiting for me to be man enough to go get it." He took her left hand. He looked at the large diamond solitaire he had given her years ago. It was beautiful, but it was cold. "Take it off," George said gently. Norma obeyed. She slid the expensive ring off her finger and dropped it into her pocket without a second thought. She held out her bare hand. The hand that had scrubbed floors, the hand that had signed the pawn, slipped the hand that had held him when he cried. George took the old ring. He slid it onto her finger. It was a tight fit. Her knuckles were a little larger now after 40 years of work, but it slid over the bone and settled at the base of her finger as if it had finally come home. "It fits," Norma whispered, tears streaming down her face. George lifted her hand and kissed the ring. Then he looked her in the eyes. "I can't give you back the worry," George said. "I can't erase the fear you felt that day in 1981. I can't undo the sacrifice. But I can promise you this, Norma. From this day until the day I die, you will never have to hide your strength from me again. You are the reason I sing. You are the reason I am." Norma threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. She wept freely, releasing 40 years of secret pride and secret pain. George held her, rocking her slowly in the garden while the stars came out one by one above them. They stood there for a long time, the king of country and his queen. No cameras, no fans, no marketing team, just a man and a woman and a circle of gold that meant more than all the platinum records in the world. The next morning, the team at Vortex Media received a package delivered by a courier. Inside was a single handwritten note on George Straight's personal stationery. There was no digital file, no email, just the heavy cream paper and the ink. Tyler opened it, his hands shaking slightly. The team gathered around. The note read, "To the team. The campaign is cancelled. There will be no vulnerability arc. My life and my wife's sacrifices are not content for your algorithm. They are the foundation of my family. However, you were right about one thing. The past is powerful, but it is meant to be learned from, not sold. I suggest you boys go home and ask your own families what they sacrificed to get you where you are. You might learn something worth more than a click. Sincerely, George Strait. P.S. If you ever record a private conversation again, you'll be hearing from my lawyers, and they are not as nice as I am." Tyler stared at the note. He looked at the empty screen where the audio file used to be. For the first time in his career, he felt a strange sensation. It wasn't disappointment, it was shame. And beneath the shame, a grudging respect. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. He turned to his team. "Pack it up," he said quietly. "We're done here." Back at the ranch, George sat on the porch strumming his guitar. The melody was simple, stripped back. Norma sat next to him in the rocking chair reading a book. The sun caught the rose gold on her finger and sent a little flare of light across the porch. George looked at her. He smiled. He started to hum a new tune. It wasn't a song for the radio. It wasn't a song for the charts. It was a song just for her. A song about a ring, a gamble, and a love that was worth more than gold. Norma looked up and smiled back. She didn't need to say anything. The ring on her finger said it all. The circle was unbroken. The debt was paid. And the cowboy had finally truly come home. The music drifted out over the pastures, mingling with the wind in the mesquite trees, a sound as honest and enduring as the land itself.